Picture a place where rules are law, the lawn is sacred, and the wrong neighbor can turn your life into hell. Now imagine you've just crossed paths with an elite veteran who doesn't take orders from anyone, except the country he swore to protect. Welcome to Evergreen Estates, where a fight over a t-shirt turned into an epic war. It was a quiet morning in Evergreen Estates, a suburban gated community where the sun shone like it was getting paid for it, probably with overtime, because the glare was almost offensive. I, Jake Miller, was in the kitchen, stirring my black coffee with the dedication of someone mixing a magic potion, trying to ignore the world outside. The house smelled of burnt toast, my fault of course, and the radio hummed a life insurance ad I'd already memorized from hearing it so much. Everything was under control, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. But the world, that bastard, had other plans. A sharp knock on the door shattered the silence, not a polite little tap asking for permission. No, this was more like a warning, the kind you'd expect from an angry mailman or a neighbor with an axe hidden behind their back. I sighed, dropped the spoon on the counter with a dramatic clink, and dragged my feet to the front door, already bracing for the worst. I opened it, and there she was, Linda Perkins, the uncrowned queen of the Homeowners Association, her blonde hair teased up like she'd stepped out of an 80s hairspray commercial. Her eyes glinted with that spark of someone who lives to point fingers. "Jake, we need to talk now." Her voice sliced through the air like an emergency siren. I glanced at the clock on the wall, an ugly thing I'd inherited from my grandma, with chickens painted where the numbers should be. "It's barely 7 a.m., Linda. What's wrong? Did my recycling offend your soul again? I swear I separated the glass from the plastic this time." She didn't laugh. Instead, she handed me a folded piece of paper with the care of someone passing a live grenade. The gesture was almost ceremonial, like she was entrusting me with the fate of humanity. I took it, feeling the weight of the drama it carried, and unfolded it. It was an official HOA notice, complete with their ridiculous logo, a stylized pine tree that looked more like a poorly drawn pineapple. I read the first few lines and nearly spilled my coffee on my favorite Metallica shirt, the one so faded it matched my will to live. My older brother, Ryan Carter, was in the crosshairs of these clipboard-wielding hyenas. The reason? Hold on to your hat. He dared to wear a camouflage jacket in the backyard. That's right, camouflage. In Evergreen Estates, where the white picket fences gleamed like toothpaste commercial teeth and the rules were holier than the Bible, this was practically a war crime. The notice declared in bold underlined letters that his attire disrespected the community's harmonious aesthetic. Harmonious. As if Mr. Henderson's lawnmower roaring at 6 a.m. was a Mozart symphony. I looked up at Linda, who stared, back with the smugness of someone who'd just won a courtroom debate. "Duh, camouflage jacket, Linda, seriously. He wasn't invading Vietnam, he was just trying to fix the grill." She crossed her arms, her pearl bracelet jangling like an alarm. "Rules are rules, Jake. If everyone starts doing whatever they want, where does it end? This place will turn into a circus." "A circus?" I shot back, stifling a laugh. "Linda, the only circus here is you showing up at my door before my coffee's even cold to tell me my brother's the suburban Rambo, Ryan, had gotten back a week ago from his latest deployment. He's a Marine, 15 years of service, the kind of guy who's faced gunfire, explosions, and God knows what else, and still has the energy to crack jokes about the Army's terrible coffee. Tastes like mud, but at least it's warm, he always says, grinning with that crooked smile that makes you forget he's seen hell up close. The man's a wall, scruffy beard, broad shoulders, and a gaze that mixes exhaustion with a spark of someone who doesn't take crap from anyone. And now? Now he was here, trying to adjust to civilian life, tinkering with a rusty grill in the backyard in the same camouflage jacket he'd worn in deserts and jungles. Except Linda Harper, the self-proclaimed queen of Evergreen Estates Aesthetics Committee, thought he was a threat to the neighborhood's visual harmony. Visual harmony. I didn't even know that was a thing until she showed up with that paper in hand. "You're kidding, right?" I said, holding the notice like it was a pizza flyer. "He just got back from a combat zone, Linda. Like literally a week ago he was dodging bullets and you're worried about his jacket. What's next? You gonna find the mailman for wearing ugly sneakers?" She straightened up, which was almost unnecessary since she already looked like a wax statue in that pristine blazer and pearl necklace that screamed, "I'm better than you." "Rules are rules, Jake," she fired back, like she was reciting the oath of some secret cult. "Evergreen has standards. Camouflage is disruptive. It disrespects the aesthetic we've all worked so hard to maintain. If he doesn't stop, there will be consequences." Consequences. The word landed like a hammer on a bent nail. I let out a dry laugh, the kind that comes more from reflex than amusement, but inside, I was boiling, a cauldron of anger bubbling so hot I could almost hear it hiss. There she was, with her low heels clicking on the floor and that air of superiority, talking about consequences to a guy who'd faced more danger than she'd see in 1,000 HOA meetings. "Consequences," I repeated under my breath, almost to myself as I stared her down. "Ever heard of perspective, Linda? Or does that not fit in your rulebook?" She didn't even blink. Just pressed her lips into a thin line, turned on her heel and marched off, the trail of her floral perfume invading the air like cheap chemical warfare. Every step was a statement. She thought she'd won, that she'd put rebel Jake Miller and his wild brother in their place. The sound of her heels echoed down Evergreen's spotless sidewalk, blending with the distant hum of a lawnmower and the lazy bark of the neighbor's golden retriever. I shut the door a little harder than necessary, the sound bouncing through the empty house, and tossed the paper onto the kitchen table, where it landed next to my now cold coffee mug. Linda might have thought that was the end of the story, that she'd delivered checkmate with her stupid notice and rehearsed speech. She didn't know the real war was just beginning, and that Ryan Carter, camouflage jacket or not, wasn't the type of guy to bow down to a suburban dictator with a Napoleon complex. As for me, I was already picturing the next move, and something told me it'd involve more than a polite argument at the next HOA meeting. I walked back into the house with the crumpled notice in my hand, the paper already starting to look like a war relic, after being folded and unfolded about 10 times. Ryan was out back, hunched over the grill like it was a bomb-diffusing mission. The camouflage jacket hung off his shoulders, stained with grease and sporting a discreet tear in the sleeve. "Souvenir from some adventure," he never fully explained. The sun beat down hard, making the grill's metal gleam, and the air smelled of freshly cut grass and motor oil. I came in through the back door, tossed my keys onto the counter with a clatter, and called out, "Hey, Rambo, come check this out." He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag so filthy it might as well have been a floor mat, and strolled inside with that easy stride that hid the volcano he was underneath. "What now? Neighbor complain about the sound of my breathing?" he asked, already wearing that half smile of someone who knew trouble came wrapped in bureaucracy. "Take a look at this," I said, holding the paper out to him like it was evidence in a courtroom. "They want to ban your jacket." He took the notice, read the first few lines with a raised eyebrow, and let out a "seriously" that was half laugh, half disbelief. "Camouflage? Have these people ever heard of freedom? Or do they think the Declaration of Independence is just a decoration to hang in the living room?" He finished reading, folded the paper with military precision that almost made me jealous, and tossed it onto the table like it was a used napkin after a poorly planned barbecue. It landed with a soft plop right next to a warm beer can he'd opened earlier and forgotten about. His eyes lit up with that look I knew all too well. The same one he had before planning something big, like the time he convinced half the neighborhood to throw an impromptu cookout just to piss off the old HOA president, or when he rigged up a plan to rescue Mr. Henderson's cat from the roof without calling the fire department. It was the glint of someone who didn't just accept a challenge, but was already 5 steps ahead, laughing in the face of anyone who thought they could boss him around. He leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, and the silence between us grew heavy for a few seconds, broken only by the hum of the old fridge groaning in the corner. "All right," he said finally, the corner of his mouth curling into a smile that was half amusement, half menace. "Let's play with this." I knew what was coming. Playing with Ryan was never something simple like writing a polite letter or showing up at the HOA meeting with an apology. No, playing with him was like lighting a match near a barrel of gunpowder and watching the show with a beer in hand. "What are you scheming?" I asked, already feeling a mix of excitement and that chill down my spine you get when you know you're about to get into trouble. He shrugged, grabbed the warm beer can and took a sip like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nothing big. Just gonna show this Linda and her little committee what happens when they mess with someone who's faced worse than a petition. He set the can down, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked at me. You in? Or are you just gonna watch from the bleachers? I laughed because there was no saying no. I'm in, you idiot, but if this ends with us getting kicked out of the neighborhood, you're paying rent for the next place. Deal, he replied, and I could already see the gears turning in his head. Evergreen Estates had no idea what was coming, but one thing was for sure. Ryan's camouflage jacket would be the least of their worries by the end of this story. The next day, Ryan didn't just ignore the rule, he doubled down. No, tripled. Down, actually. He showed up in the backyard like he'd gotten direct orders from the Pentagon. Full uniform, black combat boots shining like they'd been polished with a recruit's soul, camo pants that practically screamed, "I've survived." Things you can't even dream of. And even the beret tilted at that perfect angle that said, "I'm dangerous and I know it." He was carrying an old shovel in his hands, pretending to dig a hole in the lawn like he was setting up a field camp, and waving at the neighbors with a toothpaste commercial smile, a one-man military parade right in the heart of Evergreen Estates. I watched from the porch, leaning on the railing with a cold beer in hand, the sweaty can dripping onto the chipped wood. The morning sun hit the can, turning it into a silver beacon, and I just observed, half impressed, half waiting. For the moment, the suburban police, aka Linda Harper, would show up with invisible handcuffs. It didn't take long. Across the street, she swooped in like a hawk spotting prey, her phone raised like a Hollywood camera filming a documentary on crimes against humanity. Her blazer, pristine as always, seemed to shout, "I am the law," and her teased blonde hair quivered with indignation with every step she took. "This is unacceptable, Ryan Carter." Her voice cut through the air like a tornado siren, loud enough to wake even old Mr. Henderson, who was probably still snoring with his hearing aids off. "You'll hear from the board, I guarantee it." Ryan didn't flinch. He stabbed the shovel into the dirt with a theatrical flourish, wiped his hands on his pants, and turned to her with that calm look that had disarmed raging sergeants. "Relax, Linda," he said, his tone so casual it was like they were chatting. "About the weather. Just enjoying the fresh air, good for the soul, you know. You should try it." She turned red as a bell pepper. No, a bell pepper that fell into a bucket of red paint and then got microwaved. Her face was a mix of fury and disbelief, her eyes wide like Ryan had just confessed to burning the neighborhood flag. Her phone trembled in her hand as she filmed, probably already picturing the video title, "Rebel Marine Defies Order in Evergreen." The neighbors, of course, turned into a sideshow. Some laughed openly. I saw Mrs. Thompson from the corner house covering her mouth, while her husband pointed like it was a live soap opera. Others hid behind curtains, their nervous silhouettes flickering in the windows like ghosts of a spooked suburb. Mike Peterson, the retired accountant next door, was on his porch with a bowl of cereal in hand, his grey hair a mess and his glasses crooked. He watched the scene with a spoon frozen mid-air, milk dripping onto the floor, and nearly choked when Ryan threw him a mocking military salute. "Morning, Mike," Ryan shouted, and the old man coughed so hard I thought he'd need a defibrillator. Meanwhile, Linda, she was already typing on her phone with her thumbs flying, probably drafting an email to the board with the subject line, "Immediate execution of the Carter brothers." I could imagine the text, "Dear members, I request Jake's head on a platter and Ryan's on a pike, please. Sincerely, Linda Harper, guardian of visual harmony." I took a swig of my beer, the bitter taste sliding down as the circus unfolded. "You're poking a jaguar with a short stick, you know," I yelled to Ryan, waving the can in his direction. He turned to me, the shovel resting on his shoulder like a battle weapon, and winked. "Short? This stick's about 10 feet long, Jake, and I brought gasoline to set the jaguar on fire if I need to." He laughed, and I knew he was loving every second of the chaos. Linda across the street finished her email with a flourish on her phone, pocketed it, and shot one last deadly glare before marching back to her house, her heels clacking on the pavement like warning shots. The neighbors kept peeking, Mike wiped the milk off his shirt with a grumble, and I sat down in the porch chair, my beer nearly gone. One thing was certain. The board was going to have a collective heart attack at the next meeting, and I wasn't sure if I'd be there to defend Ryan or just to watch the bonfire burn. That night, the silence of Evergreen Estates was shattered by the sound of the mailbox slamming shut, a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot in the dark. I was in the living room, sprawled on the couch with a car magazine I was pretending to read, while the muffled sound of the TV droned on with idiotic detergent commercials. I got up, dragging my feet to the front door, and grabbed the envelope. That seemed to scream trouble just by the way it was folded, with that pompous Homeowners Association seal stuck on crooked. This time it wasn't just a warning, it was a fine. I opened the paper right there under the yellowish glow of the porch light and read it aloud to Ryan, who was in the backyard grilling burgers like the world wasn't crumbling around him. 2. $100 for repeated violation of community aesthetic standards, I shouted, holding the paper in one hand while the other waved in the air to emphasize the absurdity. The smell of sizzling meat and charcoal wafted through the open door, mingling with the sound of fat dripping onto the coals. Ryan, still in his camo pants, because of course he wasn't about to take them off just to please the committee, flipped a burger with the spatula and glanced at me over his shoulder, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "They're serious." "Man," I said, stepping down into the backyard and tossing the paper onto the plastic table beside the grill. "They want war." Ryan laughed, that deep chuckle that sounded more like an old engine rumbling. "War?" He flipped another burger, the motion so calm it was almost infuriating, and pointed the spatula at me like it was a sword. "These clowns don't know what war is. War is waking up with sand in your nose and some guy screaming over the radio that the enemy's 2 kilometers out. This," he nodded toward the paper, "this is a tantrum from people with nothing better to do, but I know war, Jake, and I'm going to give 'em a show." I knew that tone, low, steady, with a thread of menace wrapped in amusement. It was the tone he used before turning a simple situation into a legend we'd recount for years. He wasn't backing down, wasn't folding up his camo pants and stashing them in the closet to appease Linda Harper and her clipboard cronies. No, Ryan was going to pour gas on the fire, light the match, and dance on the ashes, probably with a burger in hand and a grin on his face. He grabbed a beer from the cooler next to the grill, popped it open with a snap, and handed me one without even asking if I wanted it. "Der show?" I asked, taking the can and plopping down into a creaky lawn chair that groaned under my weight. "Like what? You gonna storm Linda's house with a paintball machine gun?" He took a swig of his beer, the liquid dribbling down his chin, before he wiped it with his jacket sleeve. Yep, the camo jacket was still there, a permanent middle finger to the association. "Not sure yet," he said, staring up at the dark sky where the stars fought to shine through the neighborhood streetlights. "But I'll come up with something that'll make 'em wish they'd never messed with me. Maybe something with lights or noise or both." I laughed, shaking my head as the heat from the grill warmed my legs. "You're crazy, you know that. But honestly?" I took a sip of the cold beer, feeling it slide down as I looked at him, the firelight dancing across his weathered face. "I'm starting to like the idea of watching Linda Harper lose her mind for good. Like, completely. Maybe she'll blow up and turn into a meme in the neighborhood WhatsApp group." Ryan grinned, that winner's smile he flashed before the game even started, and turned back to the burgers, flipping another with an unnecessary flourish. "Then eat up, partner," he said, tossing a bun my way that I caught mid-air out of pure reflex. "Because tomorrow we start planning, and this $200 fine? It's going to be the most expensive ticket they've ever bought to watch us turn this place upside down." The burger landed on the bun with a juicy thud, and I knew I was officially in on it. Linda and the council might have started this, but Ryan, and by extension me, were going to finish it, and it was going to be one hell of a show. The next morning, Ryan took the provocation to the next level, which, coming from him, wasn't a surprise, but still caught me off guard. He woke up early, a rare event in itself, and put on the full uniform again. Polished boots, camo pants, jacket, beret, the whole package. All that was missing was a tactical backpack and an airsoft rifle to complete the look. I was in the kitchen, trying to make the coffee not taste like swamp water, when I saw him through the window marching to the mailbox like he was in Fallujah, not some middle-class suburb where the biggest threat was Mr. Henderson's lawnmower, swallowing a garden gnome. He walked with purpose, chin up, shoulders squared like he was crossing a war zone instead of a street lined with parked SUVs and humming sprinklers. Across the street, Linda Harper nearly had a meltdown. I swear I saw the exact moment her brain short-circuited. She was on her porch, watering a pot of geraniums with the face of someone plotting her next strike, when she spotted Ryan. The watering can slipped from her hands with a wet thud, water splashing onto her pristine slippers, and she charged across the street so fast her low heels left marks in the asphalt. Tiny craters of fury that seemed to scream, "I am the law." Her navy blazer flapped like a villain's cape, and her pearl necklace clinked like a fire alarm as she stormed forward. "This is an outrage," she yelled, stopping about 6 feet from him, hands on her hips and her face red like she'd just run a marathon. "You're openly defying the council's authority. I'm calling the police, Ryan Carter, and they'll drag you out of here." Ryan didn't even flinch. He finished grabbing the mail, a pizza flyer and an electric bill, nothing worthy of a military parade, and turned to her with that calm smile that had diffused far worse situations than a housewife with a phone in hand. "Call whoever you want, Linda," he said, his tone so casual it was like they were discussing the weather. "Just don't forget to mention I've got permission to wear this." He patted his camo jacket like it was a badge of honor and let the words hang in the air like a live grenade. She froze, confused, her jaw dropping an inch or two as she processed it. You could see the gears turning in her head, scrambling for a loophole, an argument, anything to fire back. "Permission?" she stammered, her eyes narrowing like she was reading fine print on a contract. "What permission? That's ridiculous." Ryan didn't answer. He just shrugged, that maddeningly casual move he'd perfected, and turned his back on her, marching back to the house with the same steady stride as before. The sun glinted off his jacket, picking out the shades of green and brown, and he waved the pizza flyer at me like it was a battle trophy. Linda stood there rooted in the middle of the street, phone in hand, her fingers hovering over the screen like she wasn't sure whether to call the cops, the council, or an exorcist. I dropped the coffee mug in the sink, the dark liquid splashing onto the dirty dishes, and ran to the door to meet him. "What's this permission nonsense?" I asked, holding back a laugh as he walked in, tossing the mail onto the kitchen table with a flourish. He pulled out a chair, sat down with a satisfied grunt, and took off his beret, throwing it over the backrest. "No permission, obviously," he said, his grin widening. "But she doesn't know that, and now she's going to spend the whole day researching condo laws and military regulations trying to catch me. Meanwhile, I'll figure out the next move." I burst out laughing, shaking my head as I picked up the pizza flyer to pretend I was reading it. "You're an evil genius, you know that. And I knew you had a plan. What's the next chapter in this? Soap opera?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the glint in his eyes promising more chaos. "Let's just say it involves more than a jacket. Linda wants war? We'll give her one she'll never forget." He grabbed an apple from the basket, in the center of the table, took a crisp bite, and stared at me, like he was daring me to hop on the chaos train with him. I knew I was done for. There was no resisting, and damn it, I could hardly wait to see what was coming next. That afternoon I was sprawled on the couch, debating whether it was worth getting up for another beer or if the remote on the coffee table was company enough, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Tom, the neighbor from the end of the street, that slightly paranoid guy who kept installing new security cameras to watch his own lawn. "Dude, your brother's at the store looking like Rambo. Linda's freaking out. I'm watching it all from the convenience store window." I read it and let out a laugh loud enough to startle the neighbor's cat, who was napping on the open windowsill. I closed my eyes for a second and pictured the scene. Ryan in full camo gear, picking up milk and bread at the corner market, the beret shoved onto his head like a crown of provocation, while Linda trailed him through the aisles like an amateur, noir detective, clutching her phone like a loaded gun. I could see it all in my head, him pushing the cart with that infuriating calm, maybe even whistling some random army tune, while she stumbled over her own heels to keep up. "You can't walk around like that," she'd yell, her voice bouncing off the cereal boxes and soup cans. "This is an affront to Evergreen's values, a disrespect to the community." The other shoppers, a mix of bored housewives and teens buying energy drinks, turned their heads, some snickering quietly, others just baffled by the circus invading the dairy aisle. But then came the twist. As Linda pointed at him like she was casting a spell, a big guy in a Patriots jersey with a cart full of cheap beer stopped beside Ryan. He looked at the uniform, his eyes widened, and he blurted out, "Hey, aren't you Carter? Saw you on TV. Man, that mission last year, right? Thanks for your service, brother." He stuck out his hand with so much enthusiasm, he nearly knocked over a stack of instant noodle boxes, and Ryan, without missing a beat, shook it with a firm nod that lopsided, grin creeping up like he knew exactly what he was doing. Linda went silent. Her face, already red from shouting, went from bell pepper to spoiled tomato, the kind you find at the back of the fridge, half wilted and begging to be tossed. She opened her mouth to retort, but the sound died in her throat, as the guy kept talking loudly about how Ryan was a real hero and how this little town didn't deserve him. Other shoppers started paying attention, heads turning, murmurs spreading like wildfire. She was losing control of the narrative, and you could see the panic in her eyes as she tried to figure out her next move. Then she played her final card, or what she thought would be. "Security!" she shrieked, pointing at Ryan like he was a bank robber holding a sack of cash. "This man's causing a disturbance." The store's security guard, a burly guy with short hair and a badge that read Ronnie, ambled over from the back, his belt jangling with every step. Linda crossed her arms triumphant, expecting Ryan's public expulsion like it was the grand finale of her opera. Big mistake. Ronnie stopped in front of Ryan, took one look at the uniform, noticed the patch sewn onto the jacket, a small detail but one that told a story Linda would never grasp, and his face changed. He straightened up, almost instinctively, and gave a respectful nod, the kind only someone who's worn a military uniform would recognize. "No trouble here, sir," he said, his deep voice cutting through the air like an order. Then he turned to Linda, still with that serious look, and added, "He's just buying milk, ma'am. Leave the man alone." The whole store went quiet for about 3 seconds, the kind of silence that comes before an eruption of laughter, and it came. The Patriots guy laughed first, followed by a teen with headphones who nearly dropped her soda on the floor. Linda stood there, rooted in the middle of the aisle, her phone slipping slowly in her hand as her face went from spoiled tomato to a purple I didn't even know was possible. She spun on her heels, the clack of her shoes like blanks firing, and stormed out of the store, humiliation rolling off her in almost visible waves. Ronnie gave Ryan a pat on the shoulder, muttering something like "good times" before heading back to his post, and Ryan, he just grabbed the milk, tossed it in the cart, and kept going like nothing had happened. I read Tom's text again, still laughing, and replied, "Thanks for the update. I'm heading to the store now. This I've got to see live." I knew Ryan had turned the tables once again, and I couldn't wait to hear the details, and maybe even help plan the next move in this war Linda was never going to win. That market scene was just the warm-up, an appetizer for the real chaos to come. Days later, the Evergreen Estates Council called an emergency meeting, like generals summoning a war council to plan an invasion of enemy territory. Linda Harper led the charge, chin high and navy blazer buttoned up to her neck, with her best friend and loyal sidekick Nancy Brooks at her side, a short woman with gold-rimmed glasses and a notebook full of scribbles she carried like it was the neighborhood Bible. Ryan and I were summoned, of course, with a formal email that felt more like a court subpoena than an invitation. "Attend or face the consequences," it read, signed with Linda's florid digital handwriting. The meeting took place in a conference room at the condo's clubhouse, a beige box with walls that seemed to suck out any trace of joy. The place smelled like bad coffee, the kind that sits in a thermos for hours until it turns into a viscous sludge no one dares to throw out, mixed with a faint whiff of disinfectant and pure tension. The plastic chairs creaked under the weight of the council members, and a long plywood table dominated the center, covered with papers, pens, and a plate of untouched cookies. The ceiling fan spun slowly, groaning like an old engine, while the fluorescent lights flickered every now and then, giving the scene the vibe of a B-movie interrogation. Linda opened the session by slamming a folder onto the table with theatrical force. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice sharp like a poorly honed knife, "you're being officially fined. $200 for repeated violation of aesthetic standards, and now an additional $50 for disrespectful conduct. If you don't pay by Friday, we're going to court. This is non-negotiable." Ryan, sitting beside me in his camo uniform, because of course he wasn't about to show up in jeans just to appease these people, crossed his arms and flashed a crooked smile. "Interesting," he said, his tone so calm it was like they were haggling over the price of bread at the market. "You know I'm active duty military, right? 15 years of service, including missions you only see in movies." Linda didn't even blink, though I saw Nancy scribbling something in her notebook at a frantic pace. "That doesn't change Evergreen's rules," she shot back, leaning forward as if she could drill through him with her glare. "Here, everyone follows the regulations no matter who they are." That's when Ryan played his ace. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, a slow, almost lazy move that made Linda narrow her eyes, opened a video, and set the device in the middle of the table with a click that echoed through the room. "Let's take a look at this then," he said, pressing play. A lawyer's voice, clear and steady, came through the phone's cheap speaker, a 3-minute breakdown of a federal law protecting active duty military from discrimination in housing policies, including dumb condo rules, like no camo in the yard. The video cited statutes, legal precedents, and even a recent case where a similar counsel got crushed in court for trying to fine a veteran over an American flag in his garden. The room went so quiet you could hear the fan creaking in slow motion, the hum of the fluorescent lights sounding like a chorus of insects. Linda froze, her mouth half open as if she'd been slapped by an invisible hand. Nancy stopped writing, her pen hovering in mid-air, while Mr. Jenkins, a grey-moustached old man who always looked half asleep, widened his eyes for the first time in the meeting. Mrs. Ortiz, a middle-aged woman with a colourful scarf around her neck, coughed softly, clearly uncomfortable. Ryan didn't stop there. He picked up his phone, slipped it back into his pocket, and leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Your regulations don't mean squat against this, Linda," he said, his tone taking on a steely edge. "And there's more. I've got reliable sources saying the HOA fees are going to some, let's say, questionable places. Want me to request a federal audit to check it out?" "Because I can." Her face collapsed. It was like watching a wax mask melt in real time. The red of her anger gave way to a ghostly, pale white. The other council members exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat, fidgeting with his glasses like he wanted to bolt from the room. Mrs. Ortiz clutched her scarf like it was a life preserver, and Nancy, poor thing, tried to keep her composure. But her notebook slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Linda stammered, her words coming out in a jumble. This is absurd. You've got no proof." Ryan shrugged, the move so casual you'd almost forget he'd just dropped a bomb in their laps. "If this goes to court and you lose, Linda," he went on, locking eyes with her, "what do you think happens to the council? Fines, lawsuits, maybe, even dissolution. And you imagine the scandal. HOA president loses case against military hero. Nice headline, huh?" She went white as a sheet, her lips trembling as she scrambled for an escape. Before she could respond, Mrs. Ortiz raised her hand, hesitant, her voice shaky. I think we should drop the charges. It's not worth the risk." Mr. Jenkins nodded quickly, his head bobbing like a spring toy. Yes, better to avoid trouble." Nancy opened her mouth to protest, her glasses sliding down her nose, but Linda raised a hand to silence her. She knew she was cornered. Ryan's bluff, or maybe the truth he'd thrown in their faces, had turned the tables. With a sharp motion, she crumpled the fine papers in front of her, the sound of tearing paper slicing through the silence like a muffled scream. She stood up, her blazer wrinkled for the first time since I'd known her, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the framed pine tree picture on the wall shook. The bang echoed through the room, and I swear I saw Nancy jump in her seat, looked at Ryan, who was already leaning back in his chair with a satisfied grin, and muttered, You're a brilliant son of a bitch, you know that? He chuckled low, grabbed one of the untouched cookies from the plate and took a bite. I know, he said, crumbs flying as he chewed. Now let's go home. These cookies are awful, but victory tastes damn good. It seemed like the end, but Linda... Harper wasn't the type to give up easily. She had the pride of a defeated general who still thinks she can turn the war around with one last grenade. In the days following the meeting, she tried everything to reclaim a throne that was never truly hers. Passive-aggressive emails flooded my inbox, with subject lines like, "Reminder Evergreen Standards," and paragraphs full of, "It's in the community's best interest, and we expect cooperation." Glossy flyers showed up in the neighborhood mailboxes, printed on shiny paper with titles like, "Guide to Appropriate Attire." Camo, of course, was on the prohibited items list, right below neon clothing and flip-flops with socks. She even bribed neighbors to complain. Mrs. Thompson from the corner showed up at our door with a plate of rock-hard cookies and a rehearsed speech about excessive noise, but admitted with a sigh that Linda had promised to tend her garden in exchange. It didn't work. The council, still rattled by Ryan's video and the threat of an audit, had already washed their hands of it. She'd lost. And even Mr. Jenkins, the eternal sleepyhead, sent a short email saying, "Leave the kid alone." And then on some random night, as the sky turned purple and the sound of crickets filled the neighborhood, we saw the final blow. I was on the porch with a warm beer in hand, watching Ryan fix the grill for the umpteenth time, when a moving truck pulled up in front of Linda's house. White doors, generic logo, two guys in overalls hauling boxes with the efficiency of people who've done it 1,000 times. Her window curtain twitched, and for a second I saw her face, pale, defeated, her teased blonde hair unkempt for the first time in her life. She stepped out minutes later, clutching a potted plant like it was the last remnant of her empire, and got into a silver sedan without looking back. "She's leaving?" I asked, tilting my head toward Ryan, who was wiping his hands on a greasy rag while watching the show. He took a swig of his beer and nodded, the corner of his mouth curling into a satisfied smirk. "She's persona non grata now. After that meeting, no one took her seriously anymore. It was only a matter of time before she bailed." Linda Harper's reign fell like a house of cards in a windstorm. That weekend, Ryan decided to celebrate, and, as with everything he did, it wasn't small. He threw an epic backyard barbecue, the kind of event that made the whole neighborhood smell grilled meat and fries from blocks away. The grill roared, sending smoke into the sky, while makeshift plywood tables were covered with checkered tablecloths and cans of ice-cold beer. Neighbors who'd once hidden behind curtains or sent anonymous complaints showed up like they'd been freed from a spell. Tom, from the end of the street, brought a speaker blasting classic rock so loud you could hear it at Mr. Henderson's house, who, surprisingly, showed up with a bottle of whiskey and a toothless grin. Mrs. Ortiz brought a tray of homemade empanadas. Ronnie, the security guard, came with a story about his Marine Corps days, and even Mike Peterson, the uptight accountant, showed up with a bowl of potato salad and a bad tax joke. The night turned into a festival of laughter and horror stories about the council. Everyone had their own Linda moment. Mrs. Thompson confessed she'd once been fined for planting yellow tulips instead of white, and Tom swore she'd tried to ban his drone for privacy invasion. Between beers and juicy burgers, Evergreen Estates breathed a sigh of relief, the air light for the first time in months, at least for now. I leaned against a tree in the backyard, a disposable cup in hand, and looked at Ryan, who was laughing loudly while flipping a rack of ribs on the grill. "This is going to become a legend, you know," I said, pointing my beer at him. He turned to me, the firelight dancing in his eyes, and flashed that grin of someone who knows they've left a mark. "Good. Now I can relax. Until the next Linda shows up." He tossed the spatula in the air, caught it with a flourish, and went back to the grill like the conductor of a chaotic orchestra. And so ended the Evergreen Estates war, not with a bang, but with the sound of laughter, clinking bottles, and the crackle of the barbecue. A clear lesson hung in the air, lingering like the smell of smoke. Don't mess with someone who's faced worse and won. If you liked this story, give it a like, subscribe to the Real Life channel, and tell us in the comments, have you ever dealt with a Linda in your life. Because look, we survived to tell the tale and got a barbecue out of it in the process.